Welcome, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So I'm just going to start talking about maximizing ServiceNow with best practices. My name is Garrett Griffin. I will be your host for today, and I look forward to walking you through all of this, and hopefully there's going to be a little bit of something for everybody. To start with, Cerna Solutions is the company that I work for. We do both products and services. I head up the actual services department, so I help run a team of people, and we do implementations, whether it be incident, problem, change, whether it be an actual HR implementation or facilities or GRC. We help set those things up for you to make sure they're running well within ServiceNow and you guys can use them to their fullest. We also are a products company. Our flagship product right now, at least in my opinion, is called Capio, and it's an automated testing platform for ServiceNow. It's the only one of its kind, and it actually runs through and helps unit test and regression test everything for every single update that you push through to your test environment. It's going to automate actually checking all the different user clicks that need to occur to make sure that things are running correctly. Feel free to reach out to us. We would love to talk to you more about Capio. Today, I'm going to be talking about our best practice tester. That's a little bit different. We're actually focused on checking for best practices, giving you a report to say, hey, look, this is the best practices you're following. These are the ones you're not. These are the ones you're whitelisting. And we're going to show a demo of that at the end. My name is Garrett Griffin. I've been working on ServiceNow since early 2010, so about 6.5 years now. That was the Wild West days of ServiceNow back then. At least that's what I like to say. There was no wiki that you could go to. The forums weren't really a thing back then. And even Admin 101, the training class, like the only training class that existed, and barely anybody had actually gone through it back then. So things have come a long way since that time frame. I've done lots with domain separation, so I can certainly help you out in that place personally. And I've worked with some major places, major retailers across the entire United States, some major phone and computer companies, as well as then even an international beverage company. So I've worked with some large places, and I would love to share with you some of the lessons that I have learned over my 6.5 years working on ServiceNow. So we're going to start with introducing kind of 2 example companies of typical ServiceNow customers, so we can kind of give some illustrations of how things look and how things might work. Then we're going to go ahead and talk about some non-technical best practices. I know not everybody on the call is actually a developer that wants to get into the nitty-gritty of this is how you should do things in ServiceNow. So we're going to start and actually spend a lot of today on non-technical best practices, things that we can do to make sure an implementation runs smoothly and that our ongoing work in ServiceNow runs smoothly as well. Then we'll talk a little bit about some actual technical best practices, and then we're going to end off with those technical best practices in showing our actual demo of our best practice checker that can look for those technical best practices. So to go ahead and get right to it, we've got 2 different possible companies. Example 4, which is going to be our negative example of things not to do. Their tagline is a totally real company. They've got 30,000 end users. They've got a couple different admin accounts. You can read the details right there. On the other side, we have For Instance Technologies. This is going to be our shining pillar of how things should be done example. And you can see they're very similar. So they've got a couple key differences when it comes to how many people have been trained and things like that. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So these are our 2 kind of example scenarios that I'm going to mention as we go through everything here today. So go ahead and get us started. I want to talk about some best practices that are not technical and they're not specific to ServiceNow. Most of the stuff I talk about today is going to be at least specific to ServiceNow in one shape or another, but these are not. These are things that are great practices as far as for any implementation or any sort of software development that you're dealing with. And the first thing is to have regular change windows. Most of you probably know what I mean here, but to suffice to say, I'm not talking about changing out windows under. I'm not talking about washing the windows in your house. I'm talking about having a proper change management process where you're actually paying attention to what is being modified in your ServiceNow production environments and making sure that you're only pushing update sets up to production during very specific times that you have outlined to the business. We're looking to prevent confusion and prevent unexpected production outages. This happens More often than it should, when you don't have a regular change window, there's a very big temptation to actually go in and fix something on Tuesday at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, or to fix something Wednesday night, but then Thursday morning things aren't working the way they were supposed to, or you've actually brought down the instance, et cetera, and you're affecting critical working time. So it's important for us to have a proper change management process and actually have a change window, typically on, say, a Friday in the evening, et cetera. Your developers won't like it, but it's going to make things a lot better for the actual business. And that's what we're looking for, is a better coordination between operations and IT to make sure that the ServiceNow environment is stable and that everybody knows what's about to happen far before it does. We also want to make sure that UAT is performed by end users. We can't just have testing done by the developers of your ServiceNow instance. You can't have testing just done by a QA team if you happen to have one. We want to make sure that we're actually having testing done by the end users. What we're looking to prevent here is actual bugs occurring in production, obviously, as well as a poor user experience, because those developers and those QA people are not going to be testing from your end user, not really sure what they're doing kind of perspective. Instead, they're going to be testing by the way they know that it's supposed to work. So it's important we have end users testing. The biggest thing that we're going to find there is that we're going to actually meet those user requirements that they've asked. Even if we think we know what the user wanted and they've told us everything they've wanted, we've written it down really well, we've gotten them to sign off on it, I guarantee you there's at least some groups of people that when you get into production or when you get into this UAT testing, they're going to be like, no, this isn't what I was looking for. Or they're going to be like, well, actually, now that I've tried this, this totally isn't going to work for us. So you really need to make sure that you have those end users testing before you hit production. The last thing is training, and I'm talking about end user training here. If we don't properly train our end users, and I don't mean the people using the tool every single day for their work, I mean the end users who are going in here once in a blue moon to actually submit an incident because their computer is broken, or to submit an HR request, something along those lines. We need to train even these people, because everybody needs to understand how to use the tool, and if they don't, they're going to end up blaming ServiceNow or blaming the tool simply because they don't understand what save does versus update, etc. So we need to teach them exactly how things work. If we do the training properly, we're going to find higher user adoption, and that's key. That's the key thing I want you to get out of all of this today, is to get more people using your ServiceNow instance and happy with it and falling in love with it, so that you can continue to convince your higher-ups, or if you are a higher-up, you can see all the benefits and continue to build your company around this platform, which can help streamline things and automate things and make your lives better. Moving into ServiceNow-specific best practices, training is essential. We already talked about end-user training. Now I'm talking about admin training. The sysadmin class is absolutely excellent. I highly recommend you go. I did not get to go for the first year and a half that I worked on ServiceNow, and trust me, I gave people an earful when I finally got to go, and I was like, wait, there's things in here that even after a year and a half, I did not know. I didn't know that you could customize choices this way. I didn't know you could do this way. It's so much easier to do this. So even then, I was learning things. I highly recommend, if you have developers in your instance, make sure they go to the sysadmin training course. If you're a domain-separated instance, it's even more important to make sure that you send people to the domain class. I don't care if they've been to sysadmin or anything else, they have to go to the domain class if you're in a domain-separated instance. I personally would not let a single person touch my domain-separated instance, regardless whether they're a contractor or they work directly at a vendor company or anywhere, unless I know that they've taken this training. It's that important. Looking at why is this so important, if we look at Example Core, they did an audit. They realized that they had 4 people who had, say, even the sysadmin certification, which means they've gone to the sysadmin class and they got a certification. So we've got 4 people that have done that, but only 3 of those are developers. 1 of those is a PM. Now, this is a problem because they have 6 people that are developers and admins in their development environment. So you've got 3 developers here who are working without any training whatsoever. And I can speak from experience, those people are going to do things wrong. I certainly did in my first year. I did not know some of the stuff that I should have been doing or how I should have been doing it. And as a result, I did have somebody else, my manager also knew ServiceNow, was trained. He ended up fixing some of my mistakes. And in addition, Example Core also ran into the issue that the people that are trained are going to end up teaching the untrained people, and it's going to end up slowing down your initial implementation and ongoing. Trust me, it's better. Send people, get them actually trained through sysadmin, and ideally get them the sysadmin certification. or hire people that have it so that's even better. Over in the 4-instance technologies, they've done things much better. They only have 6 people developing in their dev instance, but they actually have 7 developers who have the sysadmin certification. They also have 1 PM who has a certification, which is even better. These people know what they're doing. They make more efficient use of their time, and the tool and application are configured from the get-go the right way, so not having to actually go through and update things and fix things, etc. Admin accounts. We talked about the actual developers themselves, but now we're talking about the accounts themselves. First off, in dev, my second bullet point here is if you're in development, we want to make sure that the only people that have true admin access to development to develop things are your actual developers. Don't let your PMs actually have access to this. Don't let anybody else have admin access to any of your accounts. Only your developers should. I've seen PMs go and try to work on workflows and try to do this and try to do that. They actually end up causing a lot of rework, and they end up slowing things down. You may think you're an excellent PM who knows everything you're doing. Trust me, save it for your developers. Instead, you can have ITIL access, you can have user admin access, you can have lots of different types of access into these instances. Just don't give yourself admin. Save yourself that temptation. Make your developers do their job and actually develop. In production, we want to make sure that we have 1 production account at the very most. So yes, we are sharing accounts amongst our developers in production, possibly. We're really looking to have kind of 1 or 2 people at most during change windows getting on, pushing our update sets through. This helps eliminate any sort of temptation for people to help fix things randomly throughout the day before their boss notices, before the other developers notice. This keeps people out of production. It keeps them following the proper change management process. So limit the number of admin accounts you have in production. Testing. Testing is important. I mentioned we've got Tapio to help you do that automated testing. If you don't have an automated solution, still make sure you're doing your regression testing. Make sure you're doing your functional testing, your UAT testing. Of course, this is critical. But, I mean, come on. Every tool has to do that, right? In ServiceNow, I'm going to call up background scripts. This is something I see a lot of people, they don't test properly in development. Background scripts, for those that don't know, are kind of ad hoc scripts that we can run. Fixed scripts is another way to do this. Fixed scripts are better, but background scripts I still see used quite a bit, and that's fine so long as you're actually testing it in development. If you try to write a script and you run it directly in production, when you're even during a change window when things come up, you could run into an infinite loop. You could crash your entire system. I've seen that happen, and it was really difficult to get back up. And it could just be ineffective. You could think that the script worked fine, and 3 days later you find out your background script didn't do what you needed it to do. So test those scripts in a development environment, in a test environment as well. Make sure they're really working well before you move them and work on them in production. Customization. We've all heard it a lot, right? Customize as little as possible. It's fine to configure. Use business rules. Use client scripts. Use UI policies. Configure all you want. But it's important to make sure that we are customizing as little as possible. Now, most people say, I'm going to customize as little as possible because of upgrading from, say, Geneva to Helsinki. Because of that reason, I don't want to do customizations. I think at times there's even vendors that will tell you this. I'm saying no. That's not why you don't customize, because honestly, when you go to upgrade your system, every time that I've done this, the issues that I run into are due to new features that aren't working correctly or that we have to implement, or other random core bugs, things that used to work great but now are not working properly, such as, I don't know, service catalog UI policies. That's a good example these days. There's things that used to work that aren't anymore. Customizations, they're going to be fine. They're not touched by anything ServiceNow has pushed out most of the time. They're probably going to work just as they did before the upgrade. There is one exception to that, which we're going to talk later in technical best practices, and that's DOM manipulation, and I'll explain that then. So why don't we customize then? Well, it's because maintenance is cumbersome. And whenever we have a customization, which could be doing things like DOM manipulation, or it could just mean that we've got like 50 business rules and 50 client scripts to make this one feature work, I would call that a customization. Anything that's that large of an effort is going to be very difficult to actually hand that knowledge off to a different person. If you're going to have turnover in your company, it's inevitably going to happen. Or if you're using contractors, you may end up switching from one contractor to another, or that contractor themselves will eventually have turnover. It's the nature of the business. And you need to have documenting around all of this stuff, around every single customization you've done. You need to have a good knowledge transfer. That's very difficult to do, especially if you have a new developer who doesn't have as much experience. So we want to try to keep customizations to a minimum. We want to use configuration as much as possible, keep things simple, keep things straightforward. Now that said, we are going to customize some, and that's okay. And the reason why is what I talked about earlier. End user experience is key. If you're having people involved that are in user experience, if you're opening this up to your entire company, the best thing you can do is make sure their experience is good. Don't worry so much about people using it every day. They're going to complain. They're going to want things a specific way, and that's great. We're going to try to help them out and as we go forward. But in the beginning and just overall, end user experience is key to make sure people are buying into the system. They're using it the way that you want them to use it, and they're actually finding a benefit out of everything. And that's why some customization will occur, because we need to do whatever customization is necessary to get the end users on board and happy with us. But we want to minimize it. Only do what we absolutely have to do to make sure that we've got those people happy and using the tool. People, if they're happy with the system and the end user experience is great, they're going to use the system more. They're going to call into your help desk less. They're going to call in less. Instead, they're going to use the self-service you've put in place to actually submit their tickets. That's very important. Additionally, you may think automation is what we got ServiceNow for. We want to automate setting up user accounts. We want to automate going out and doing provisioning and automate everything in the world. Well, that's great, but it's only worth it if you actually have somebody using the tool and submitting the tickets. So let's do that automation, but perhaps it's phase 2. Maybe it's after we know that we've got people using the system, we've got things streamlined, we know we have a process down. Now we can start automating things. Search is king. For the end user experience, the biggest companies that I have seen, the biggest worldwide companies, when they do this right, they end up making sure that the search on their custom user portals is working perfectly, that people can find what they're looking for. The next thing I'm going to focus on is people problems. Don't solve them through ServiceNow. You can try to do certain things maybe to help fixing through ServiceNow, making things easy. You could argue making the end user experience as fixing a people problem. Not really. You're just trying to make sure people like it and people use it. Don't solve people problems through the tool. The example that I'm going to give you is example 4. They had an HR team that was not completing their tasks efficiently. These people weren't doing their job. Yes, I'm talking about the HR employees not doing their job, and they probably needed to be talked to by some sort of HR representative or a manager or somebody. But they wanted to fix it within the tool. They created a restrictive system to assign the HR tasks out to people, create deadlines for them, and force very rigid processes to make sure they did things properly and to make sure they distributed the workload evenly amongst everybody. In the end, the HR teams, the people that were not doing things properly were still not completing their tasks. They found new excuses for everything. All they ended up doing was frustrating the good employees that they had on the HR team that were doing their jobs well. Because now those employees were getting lots of complaints from people about tickets that weren't getting worked, and they couldn't even grab them out of somebody else's queue. So we want to make sure that we're not solving people problems through the tool. You're going to need to go in and actually have meetings with those people, work on their behavior, work on their attitude, let them go if needed. You're going to need to focus on the people problems through a different method. Alongside of that, we want to make sure we're not over-regulating. We don't want to lock down every single field on a form. We want to make sure that we're allowing for an exception process to take place. Because perfection is a great goal, but it's a terrible plan. You're not going to have 100% of everything working properly. You're not going to have 100% of the data working properly. You need to allow for exceptions to occur in your process. So don't lock things down too tight. When we go to implement, whether it be your first implementation, whether you be implementing a new module, be agile about it. Get it up and running first. Get it up and going. Get something out there. Have a steady base, a steady platform, and then you can iterate. Then you can make things better. Focus on your end user experience. Make sure that's running well. Make sure that's always on the top of your mind. But don't go overboard. You can save things for later, such as mobile. Mobile is very complicated. People think it's going to be straightforward. There are vendors that will tell you that it works right out of the box. But I'm going to tell you, for every 80 hours that you spend developing, you may end up still spending 20 hours on mobile to make sure everything's working properly, especially if you're using Service Catalog. So this is something to keep in mind. Mobile implementations can be faster, but things just can be very different. Now, tablets may work out of the box, and that could be perfect, but there are other things we need to just be smart about. If we're not agile, if we try to do everything up front, we spend 2.5 years getting things done before we ever launch it because we want it perfect, we may end up running out of budget and having the entire thing actually run out and have an unsuccessful implementation, so we're in danger of not having a successful one. So my pro tip, you can always save mobile for later. We also want to streamline things. When I say streamline, I mean our service catalog. I would say there's two ways to do it. The best way is to make sure that you have as few service catalog workflows as possible. Ideally 3, I think, is the way to go. Example 4, they had 26 different workflows amongst 23 catalog items. That's more workflows than there are catalog items. I've seen this done at Example 4. It took them 9 months to get all this done. And that was only 23 catalog items. And the reason why was very specific workflows. If you don't know what a workflow is, think Visio diagram. They had Visio diagrams for each one of these. They were very specific. They went to, say, 3 different approvers, and they went to 5 different people to sign out to, and each one was different. This was a problem. Instead, we want to make sure that we're doing it like, for instance, where we have 100+ catalog items done in 2 weeks, because each one of those items was simply using one of 3 workflows: a hardware request workflow, a software request workflow, and an access request workflow. That's what we're looking for, a true shopping cart. Technical best practices. You want to avoid DOM manipulation. The big thing here is being avoid. Just like we said with customizing, there's going to be some scenarios where you need to use DOM manipulation to achieve what is really vital for your end user experience. But we really want to avoid as much as possible, because this is what breaks with upgrades. I'd say 50% of the time at least, your DOM manipulation is going to break when you go to upgrade. This definitely happens to Geneva to Helsinki. It definitely happened Fuji to Geneva, and I'm betting it's going to happen Helsinki to Istanbul as well. So that's something to keep in mind to try to avoid it. If you don't know what I mean by that, we can always talk at a later point. If you hear the words jQuery or prototype, at that point we're talking about DOM manipulation. In your client scripts, you want to make sure you're using asynchronous calls. Again, if you're not a developer, don't worry too much about it, but if you hear your guys talking about asynchronous versus synchronous and things along those lines, make sure they're using asynchronous, simply because it improves the user experience. It makes things feel snappy, makes things feel like they're churning along well, because it doesn't prevent them from typing in another field while something is going on. The same thing is going on in the background, but it feels faster. There are exceptions to every rule, of course, but in general, stick with asynchronous calls. Finally, don't use current.update. Just don't do it. You don't need to. There is one exception, sure, UI actions, exceptions to every rule, but really current.update's not needed. You don't need to use it in workflows, because the workflow engine is going to update your record for you. You don't need to use it in before business rules, because it's going to update the record for you. And you don't need to use current.update in after business rules ever, because you can end up causing a loop which could crash your entire system or cause your event processing to be extremely backed up. We also need to make sure we're focusing on security. When you first start, you're not going to be as secure as you want. You're going to just need to get things up and going and trust the ServiceNow really does have some pretty good security out of the box. But you're going to have some security through obscurity. You're going to say, look, we're not using the problem module, or these people aren't using the problem module, so they don't get to see a link in the left-hand navigation. Well, that's great. But if they know how to mess with the URL, they're going to find their way there. So eventually, lock things down better. Use ACLs where you can. Use your before query business rules to go along with those ACLs as you need to. Make sure things are secure, and you're going to have a much happier security department and much happier higher ups. Finally, variable sets are your friends. We talked about having just a few service catalog workflows. Use variable sets. Some newbie developers don't realize you can put UI policies, you can put client scripts, you can put these things inside your variable sets, and then use these variable sets everywhere. A good example is shipping information. There's a lot of different special logic around how getting a shipping address from somebody. And you can put these on all of your different catalog items wherever you need to, and only maintain it in one place. So variable sets can be very helpful. All right, we've got a couple minutes left here. I want to go ahead and dive into a demo of our actual best practice checker to kind of show what it does and show how it can help you find those best practices and whether you're meeting them or not. Now, this is something that you would not actually, as of right now, come into this instance and run. What you would do is you would give us a few key information, and this is available to our existing customers and anybody that's working with us. So if you're interested in this at the end, come talk to us. We'd love to work something out with you. You would give us the login to your instance URL, which we would already have if we're working with you, and one admin name and password to that instance URL, ideally a dev instance, which if we're working with you, we already have anyway, so we can help run this for you. This is built entirely in our ServiceNow instance, reaching out to your ServiceNow instance, nothing else involved, and it's very secure. So that said, I've got all this information in here from one of my own dev instances. And I can go ahead and right up here at the top right, I can go ahead and click Execute Test. What this is going to do is it's going to go ahead and say, look, I need to run a new test, which could be scheduled for, say, 10 p.m. at night. But right now, it's going to go ahead and run it immediately. It's going to run through a list of a whole bunch of different test cases that I have put together, and we've built in such a way we can keep expanding it. So we've got a bunch of different test cases following these different best practices that we know we need to adhere to. And each one of those test cases has different ways of actually finding things and checking for everything underneath it. So that's what this is currently looking for. It takes about, let's see how long it took this time, 12 seconds. It takes about 12 seconds to run. So it's very quick. Even for large, very heavily modified instances, it's still very efficient. My score is -11 right now. That's because I'm not perfect. Nobody is. 0 is your perfect score because any instance this finds of you not following best practice is a negative thing. So every score I have is a negative. I've got better over time, and I can see this from my history. I started at -421, and now I'm at -11. That's great. I can actually open this up and take a look at, well, what was it? What happened here? What went wrong? What went right? And I could go through all the details here and see where my grade's A+. Now, as the customer, you're not going to see this screen. We see this screen for you. What you're going to see is what's going to get emailed to you automatically, and that's this PDF right here. It's going to go through and actually say, look, this is for this instance. This is what the actual score was. This is when we ran it. These are the areas where you were perfect. You didn't have any issues at all. And yet these are the areas that need work. And it's going to tell you how many issues it found of each one. For each area that you actually need to work, we've got a handy-dandy explanation of why you need to do things a specific way, and it's very detailed in helping you understand it. We also have a link to even more information that you can read through and to see kind of our source of why do we say this is the best practice, where do we get this information from. Some of them are from the wiki, some of them are links to blog posts that explain it very well, not just from us, but from other experts out there as well. So this is giving you a very detailed list of, okay, well, this is, for this particular best practice, this is what I need to look at. And then we've actually got links to your instance, to the script you need to fix. So if you're viewing this on your computer, you can click that link. It's going to open up for you, and you can go in and modify that script right away, right there, to go ahead and fix what you need to fix. And this checks for all the different best practices. Now you may say, well, I know I don't follow best practices in certain positions. I know that certain times I'm using DOM manipulation when I know I shouldn't, but I have to. Or I'm using a global business rule because, well, it's the only way for me to go ahead and go about something. That's fine. You can come back to us and say, look, these are the exceptions to the rule. These are the ones we know we absolutely have to do this way. We can come in here, right-click, and say whitelist record. That means for your instance, from now on, whenever we run this, it's not going to flag that particular item anymore. So what this allows us to do is slowly build up your list of exceptions right here, even with a reason of some sort, of exactly what it is that you've said this is an exception for. And then when we run it again for you, the next time you want us to run it, to check for those best practices all over again, then we're actually going to be able to see you slowly improve as you go. And again, it only takes 12 seconds, so you could even run this, say, run it today, run it tomorrow, as you go through and are actually fixing things or you're whitelisting things to make sure things are working better. Right there, I can see I have a score of -10 now because I've whitelisted something that I know is absolutely the way that it needs to be done. So again, we've got a list of best practices. We can run this for all of our existing customers. If you're a new customer with us, we'd love to talk to you, get this set up for you, see what we can do for you guys to actually help make your ServiceNow lives better, make sure you're following best practices, and making sure that you're maximizing your ServiceNow experience. Thank you very much for listening to me. I appreciate that very much. I wanted to look real quick to see if we have any questions. No, it doesn't look like we have any questions, but we answered it, and that's excellent. We do have a handout. Look for it. These slides are available. If you're interested, feel free to ping us and say, hey, I'd like to have a deep dive into technical best practices. I would love to do that if there's interest. I appreciate you all listening to me. It's been a pleasure sharing with you, and I hope you all got something out of it. May we all get better user buy-in because of this. Thank you, everybody. Have an absolutely great day.